And the last thing I probably want to talk about was that my manager, who led the recovery for New Zealand Red Cross, as I said, we hadn't done it before. She was working it out as she went, but she did have the benefit of having been involved in recovery in various places around the world, so she had some idea, much more than I did, certainly. And she was building our recovery framework and setting up our initial team. She said, where's the guidance on recovery leadership? Because this is not business as usual. And she was hearing people try to fit business as usual to this environment, and it wasn't working. And she was saying there's a lot around how do we lead in crisis situations, which in the initial weeks, there's a lot around how do we lead business as usual, which that stuff still applies in many ways. But this is a very different context. It's much more uncertain. The demands are huge. It's like everything's supersized. There's huge time pressure. Just the whole environment is very, very different to business as usual. And so where's the guidance on that? So she did a Winston Churchill Fellowship a year before I did mine, looking at leadership and recovery. And unsurprisingly, they were quite similar. So I went looking at how do we support the supporters, but actually it came down to leadership in many ways. Incidentally, in that supporting the supporters, there's also messages from people working in recovery to other people working in recovery too, as an additional something that I wanted to include. But most of it was around leadership. But the challenge we had with the Winston is that it asked us to bring that knowledge overseas that we can help apply to what's going on in New Zealand. Very useful, mainly because people in Christchurch knew what they needed, but they were the cantankerous Cantabrians, remember? That were the moaning ones asking for things all the time, or moaning and complaining about things, and people outside didn't get it, and our head offices were elsewhere, or the funders were elsewhere. And so they actually, from the Winstons, they could have something that said, here's some evidence base for the things that we know we need. So for them that was quite useful for advocating for what they need. But we really wanted to include the Christchurch voice, some of what we had learned about leadership. So we created a global resource, so it's got voices from around the world, including Australia, primarily Kinglake, looking at leadership and recovery, and a lot of that including how do we support our teams. And we thought a lot about how we did this though, because again and again and again, there are learnings from disasters that sit in a drawer. Right? There are sort of lessons that never learned. And we thought, well, why is that? And I just remember I was thirsty for information, and luckily I had people that I could ring up who weren't in the thick of it and say, oh yeah, I've since read this and it's really helpful. But when you're in the thick of it, you don't have time to spend 3 days researching and then 4 days to read things, and so people, if you get a manual or something, will only crack to about, you might see the spine crack to about page 9 if you're lucky. When you're working, you just don't have time, do you? You don't have the luxury of mental space, or cognitive space. Absolutely, you can't absorb information, you can't. So we had to create something quite different, and we designed that for the end user, and people said to us, we don't have time, we don't have brain space, we want something hopeful and optimistic, and we want some images that are hopeful and optimistic, because now we are sick of being surrounded by this stuff, and we've got our own disaster images going on day and night in front of us. We want real people's stories and voices. We want not to be told how to do it, but we want some pointers and some questions or some reflective. And we certainly want some tools, because that's the other thing. We had some key messages, and we didn't bring them today. Apologies, the Leadership and Recovery books, and I know that have you all been sent a link?
Sent it out, but if anyone wants one,
yeah.
From Sydney to the next Wellbeing meeting.
So essentially you can access it electronically, but the idea was to actually give you hard copies, so they'll be coming. Yeah, so anyone who would like one, let us know. And we'll get them out to you. But essentially they look very different to anything that you will have seen before. There are messages in there, so we looked at all the things, and we asked people to go back in time, jump in your time machine, and thinking about recovery leadership. And I should point out, many people didn't think they were recovery leaders, but they undoubtedly are. This leadership and recovery occurs in many different places, and sometimes haven't. Right? So the people that are the glue holding communities together. And to go back in your time machine, and what message would you give yourself, to your previous self, in terms of leading or your role in this recovery? And then we've categorised them into 9 themes. And you'll find in there, each theme has about a paragraph maximum. That's your text. That's it. Which is challenging when you're trying to create, this much out of a whole Winston Churchill report on, but that's, otherwise it's not going to work for the end user. And then you've got quotes from people, and on the other side you've got questions that are kind of your reflection. So what? What do you do with this? What might you think about? Again, not how to do it, but how might this apply, because everyone's situation is different. The other thing we found is that people again and again said, I was told this message and I think it's really important. I didn't do it, but this is the message I passed on to someone else. And we thought, And I just remember Kate Brady saying the same thing to me, yeah, good luck with this, I really struggle, but you're going to need to slow down, And it really helps to get that from someone who gets the gritty reality, but man, is it hard to do. And so we started asking the question, okay, so you've got these messages, what would it have taken for you to have listened? And for you to have actually put it in place. And so we've created some tools. And in the back, and I'm wondering if you can have a look in the back, there's a page that looks like, it's kind of a group of cards.
Yeah, it's at the very
Perspective checker cards. So these are one of the ideas that came out of that conversation. What would it have taken? And this is the idea that you lose perspective at least one point along the way. You get caught up in the minutiae, the chronic stress kicks in, and you lose your ability to really self-monitor, and to understand where things are at for you. And so if we know that's likely to happen, and it's very hard to see it when we're in that space, then perhaps we should have a strategy for that beforehand. So this is our strategy. So this is a group of cards, and they say things like, trust more, give others permission to do things. Is this role still right or good for you? Seek a range of voices and perspectives. Listen now, listen well. People will get into that. Go, go, go. Try something different, be creative. Reconnect with those you serve. Take a break. Go get some sleep and spend some time with people you care about. So these are the and the people told us the sorts of messages that they probably would have found useful if they'd been able to listen. And then the idea around this is, it says here on the, and if I say for me, I, Jolie Wills, respect your wisdom, Kate Brady, for example, to know when I need this card. So you find someone who you have a lot of respect for, that you're likely to listen to at a time when you probably don't want to listen, and that has your best interests in heart and has some perspective in this that you won't. I commit to action based upon the card you give me, knowing that it might be difficult for me to hear and see the reality at the time. So that's one example of a tool to try. And another one is a wild card, and that's that, how we said we wished we had worked across those various petals earlier. Actually, let's think about getting someone with a radically different perspective around the table when we're addressing an issue or working on a project or needing some perspective. So those sorts of ideas are part of the resource.
Can I just say, I read that when I probably listened to it. And I remember my husband telling me that one, but there's no way I was listening to him.
Yeah, I was your husband.
Yeah. Like, I'm thinking that's his own issue that's coming out there about I'm not home. Do you know what I mean? But they're very, very good. It's just, at the beginning, you don't necessarily know how long it's going to be. So it's having the initiative of someone saying to you, I know this is going to take 2, 3, 5 years. Do you need to do this?
Yes. Yeah. And that's what we were trying to get to with that particular resource. And the reason that we wanted to develop it was, it was all motivated from our leaders in Canterbury. As I said, everyone from volunteer through to state level, who we really thought, how do we support them? And then visiting this lady in Japan who said, oh my goodness, I'm human. And thinking, this is about not feeling alone in what you're experiencing and having that companion in your pocket. I guess that the wisdom, so we say it's the wisdom of over 100 leaders from around the world who work to disaster recovery. And it's very human wisdom. It's not a, this is how you do it, this is the, it's that very human, it's that feeling of not being alone. And that thing that you can pick up every now and again, use it as part of your planning, because it tells you some of those things you need to plan for, like the fact you'll lose perspective, but also to check in with yourself and to, it's got various tools in there like the burnout checklist, and you'll hear people say, if I go back to hard, that was me, as you go through. Those sorts of things that if we can help use it as a strategy, so maybe every month you check your burnout checklist, or you work with your team to do something like that. One's a scale that's got martyr at one end and robot at the other, and this came from a story from Kate Brady, who said, her manager early on said, are you a martyr or are you a professional? And she says, we've heard this story a few times.
Oh, I know the individual question.
So, and Kate talks about the fact she was very confused by this question, are you a martyr or a professional? And the manager said, well, if you're a martyr, then I'll just roster you left, right and centre. It'll be very helpful. You'll be able to do all the things that no one else wants to do, and I will get as much out of you as I possibly can in the next, few months. But I won't bother to invest in you or to train you because you're not going to be here very long. And if you're a professional, then I know that you'll be here to support your communities in the long term. You'll tell me that this is not a good shift for you to take because you need to say no right now. And I know it's worth investing in training in you, and that you will be here long term for the people that you're supporting. Which are you? And so that really challenged her, and she obviously remembers that, and it's something that I remember because she tells the story. And we extended the scale to go at the other end of the robot. It's almost like those signs of burnout, right? In terms of, we get that feeling that we're indispensable, that if we're more burnt out, we get. If we're, if we're starting to show those signs, then recovery can't happen without me. The whole world will fall apart. That person's recovery will fail because I'm not there. So that aspect of, that really defeats the purpose of what recovery is all about. And at the other end, you've got the robot, which is, we become hardened to what we're doing as a result of burnout. So it's kind of understanding where we want to be in the middle, in that sort of green zone rather than either end. And I know Phil Brewster, who's one of my team, who's worked a lot overseas, he worked in East Timor, he said, you need to take Marta a whole lot step. He said, I had a God complex. He said, I really did, so to really, he said, I can identify with that, and I wished I'd had something like that at the time that I was working. So those are just some of the, I guess I encourage you to have a look and think about your own perspectives